Okay, hello everybody. It's just about 4 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Obviously, we were hoping we'd have a bit more news from Ofqual by this point this afternoon, but obviously we haven't had that yet. So what I'm going to do is quickly look at what the Prime Minister said yesterday in his update to the nation, and then look into some of the detail of that that's come out this afternoon. Then do a quick reminder about where we are with Ofqual and some of the top tips that we're kind of offering as SSAT. And then I'll finish by looking at some of the Q&As that we've had over the past few weeks. So starting by looking at what Boris Johnson said about school reopenings. So, as we know, the announcement yesterday included a three-phase process to reopen society. And in phase 2 of that, we know that primary schools will be opened for reception, year 1 and year 6, as early as the 1st of June, if certain criteria are met. And if those criteria aren't met, then they won't be opened. There is also an ambition from the government for exam classes, basically years 10 and 12, to at least see their teachers in person before the summer holidays. And again, we'll look into the detail of that in a moment. And of course, the other big announcement yesterday was that more parents, more workers will be encouraged to return to work, especially in industries like manufacturing and construction. So what do we make of how do we make sense of this as schools? Well, I think, first of all, we shouldn't knee-jerk. At the moment, the government advice for schools remains unchanged in terms of who you're open to and who you're not open to, and that hasn't changed. However, at this point, it might be useful for you as senior leaders with your teams and your governors or trustees to think through a few questions. So this week, parents are being told to go back to work if they cannot work from home. The government haven't said that means that you should be taking on their children into your school, in addition to vulnerable children and children of key workers. But would you, if parents came to you and said, well, look, I need to go back to work, I've been told to go back to work by the government, I don't have any childcare, I can't afford childcare, can my child come to school? What's your response going to be as a school, making sure that the health and safety and well-being of your staff and school community is at the fore? And then if the government advice changes, how, do you have a sense of how many additional students that would bring into your school community on a daily basis? So again, not about a knee-jerk reaction, but start thinking about some of these issues now, and it will be helpful. Obviously, many of you were open, or all of you were open over the Easter holidays and over the bank holidays as well. There's been no firm commitment from the DfE that schools have to be open over the May half term or open over the summer. But again, perhaps in the chat function, if you'd like to comment on whether you intend to be open over half term and summer, that'd be really helpful. My colleague Mike, as ever, is on hand in the chat to ask me questions as we go. So please do use the chat function to ask questions. Of course, with all of this, we know that safeguarding health and safety measures have got to be observed. We know that staffing will be an issue. If we have increased numbers of students in school, we'll be asking more staff to come into school rather than working remotely. And also, we've had a lot of conversation on the SSAT email forums and the blogs about a recovery curriculum. So what plans do you have in place to have a sort of recovery curriculum when all students are back together? So a lot of questions remain unanswered, but I think the key point there is not to knee-jerk and to reassure governors and parents as well that we don't need to knee-jerk based on yesterday's announcement. So today, the Prime Minister has been in the House of Commons giving more information about it. And in the last hour before this seminar, which you can imagine I was thrilled about, the government have released their COVID-19 strategy that was released this afternoon. So there are two main sections that relate to schools. The first is about phase 1 on page 26 of the document. And I think what is crucial to point out there is, again, the rules have not changed. However, there is that, if you look at that middle paragraph there about halfway down, what the document says is there is a large societal benefit from vulnerable children or the children of critical workers attending school. Local authorities and schools should therefore urge more children who would benefit from attending in person to do so. So essentially, a steer from government that if you have, under the current regulations, vulnerable children and children of key workers who would be better to be in school than not, then you should be proactively encourage them to do so. There's also in that final paragraph an interesting point that paid childcare, for example, nannies and childminders, can now take place, providing the public health principles that are set out at the end of the document are in place. So again, obviously not all parents are able to afford childcare, but if there are parents who are intending to go back to work based on yesterday's announcement, actually they are now able to engage childminders and other childcare agencies. So the other section on schools in this document published this afternoon is on page 30, and this talks about phase 2. Really, if everything remains steady and R remains under 1, which will kick in from the 1st of June. So as I already said, we know reception year 1 and year 6, that's the first priority group. Again, being taught in smaller classes, and then in secondary schools, prioritising years 10 and years 12 who have exams next year. But I think if you look what wasn't in Boris Johnson's speech yesterday, but is in this document this afternoon, is that that penultimate sentence. The government's ambition is for all primary school children to return to school before the summer for a month if feasible. So, if you're working with primary schools, again, something just to be conscious of. But in terms of secondary, I think based on what's come out this afternoon, we're really looking at only year 10 and year 12 before the summer. So a lot remains unanswered. Equally with the Ofqual consultation, we've had the initial response that I emailed everyone about, but we haven't had the full response yet. So I'm going to very quickly, because we've gone over this in other policy updates, very quickly go through the current Ofsted proposals. So with the teacher assessed grade, remember it's teachers using a whole range of evidence and their professional judgment and their expertise as teachers and their knowledge of the exam system to come up with the most likely grade a student would have had they sat the exams as normal. And I don't think we can stress this enough to teachers undertaking this exercise at the moment. That is not necessarily the same as their last working at grade. It might not be their target grade, or indeed their last predicted grade that you got as SLT or the governors were given. And I think a lot of people have been in contact over the last couple of weeks to say, well, are we trying to say what the student deserves, what we think they should have got? And the point is, it's not what they should have got, it's what they most likely would have got. So it's not what they work at necessarily in class every day. If you know that student always crumbles in exams, and we happen to work in an exam system, the teacher is giving their judgment on the most likely grade under that exam condition. We might not like the exam format and not think it's fit for purpose, but that's what we're being asked to comment on, what that student would have got on an average day, on an average exam, not their best day, not their worst, and not an exam that really suited them, nor an exam that just didn't work for them at all. What they would have got had they set that grade. And of course, the same rules therefore apply for SEND students who might have had alternative arrangements or extra support. Again, the teacher is using their professional judgment to say, had that SEND student sat the exam, with that additional support, what would they have achieved? And that's the point. So in terms of the evidence used, you have a huge range of evidence that you can use. Some caution from both Ofqual and DfE about using any assessment that's been done since lockdown started. That's not to say you can't use assessment during that time, but you have to be very careful about what that assessment tells you. There's no need to provide evidence for examples at this point, but if your school were moderated, then your heads of department and teachers will be able to need to support the submissions they made. So do keep any evidence you use at this point. In terms of parents and families and bias, this is a question that's come to us time and time again about the involvement of parents. And of course, parents are naturally concerned about this process. And many of them, for very good reasons, want to offer their own evidence of how students are doing and their own explanation of why students perhaps didn't perform as well previously. I think what we have to be very, very clear about is this is incredibly unhelpful in any situation and does not encourage a fair process with integrity. And I think all schools need to send a message to parents that sort of contact, as well-meaning as it might be, is not appropriate and puts a huge amount of stress on staff. So examples of this sort of behaviour, in parents informing teachers of private tuition, parents providing their own assessments of learning or progress and saying, oh, actually, Nisha's doing really, really well with her maths in her learning. And then also parents, given reasons for poor performance in the January mocks, sort of bereavement or personal circumstances. Unfortunately, as well-meaning as these are, I think we have to say these are unhelpful, and they are certainly not helpful for teachers to have put on them during this process. And I think it's the role of school leaders to really make that very, very clear to support teachers. So in terms of ranking, just a reminder, it's a ranking per qualification, per subject, and every student must be ranked from most secure to least secure within each of those grade boundaries. And no two or more students can be on the same rank order. So you have to distinguish between potentially very seemingly similar students. Clearly harder for larger subjects, particularly subjects where you might have several teachers who don't know the students that you're talking about, and you're trying to compare two students who only, each teacher knows very well. So really, really difficult exercise to do. And remember, it's all students enter for that qualification, any year group. So if you've got year 10s and year 11s and any resitters or private candidates, they're all in one single list. And again, can't stress enough, teacher assessed grade may be changed up or down depending on how generous or harsh you've been in your marking, but that rank order will not change. So if they move one of your subjects' grades up or down, individual students' grades might change, but that rank order will stay the same. So it's really important to get that right, particularly for people on the edge of each one. The national standardization, we still don't have the formula, obviously, but that will then create the calculated grade from the teacher assessed grade to stop inflation or deflation of results. And there are three things that we'll take into account: national grade distribution, the prior attainment of your exam cohort. So if your current year 11s are better, for want of a better word, but are better based on their key stage 2 data than your previous cohorts, that will be accounted for. And the controversial bit, your previous results. So they'll look at your results in that subject and whether that rings true. When we come to the Q&A, we'll see there is no appeals around that previous results section. If you've had a dip for a couple of years, unfortunately, that will feed in to that formula. We're looking at this in more detail on Thursday with Wrigley's lawyers, but just a reminder that until the calculated grades that exam boards issue are published in August, you absolutely must not release those teacher assessment grades or rank order of students. If you do, it's considered an exam malpractice, and depending on your particular terms of contract, it could be considered gross misconduct by any individual who says that. And I think after publication, again, those results should be considered very, very confidential and not released or discussed by any members of staff. However, as we know, under the current laws, through a data subject request, an individual student can request from you as a school their teacher assessed grade, their order in the rank of that grade, and any written or recorded correspondence that relates to this. And you will have to provide that within the 28-day limit. So if on results day you have 50 students ask for that in each subject, that's a lot of work that you will need to do to get that that data, particularly any written or recorded correspondence. Now, of course, there is a chance that the government will say, actually, students aren't able to request this under GDPR, and they will amend the law accordingly. At the moment, they can. So your teachers need to be very, very conscious that if they're writing what might seem like a fairly flippant email saying, actually, I think Amelia should be higher than that, that email might become might be requested by that student, and you have to provide it under the current law. So just again to remind your staff about that data regulation, and we anticipate potentially quite a number of requests coming in, but more about that on Thursday, so I'll pause there on that. And just a reminder about appeals in the autumn series. Basically, the appeals process, again, without having the detail of the final response from Ofqual, does not allow for students to appeal if they feel they've been given the wrong teacher assessment or wrong rank order. It does not allow for schools to appeal if they think that their results would have gone up this year based on previous results. Basically, the only way you can appeal is if you think the data that you submitted somehow was used wrongly. So if students are not happy with their grades, they should be encouraged to sit the exams in the autumn series or the 2021 summer series if the autumn series doesn't happen, depending on where we are with social distancing and so forth. But essentially, the appeals process will not be about the teacher assessed grade. Some points about exam fee refunds. We've had questions about whether there'll be any refunds given exams aren't going ahead. Exam boards are currently working out what refunds, if any, they're able to offer. I think, being really honest, I would be very sceptical if we get large refunds this year. And the reason for that is simple. The amount that we pay to exam boards, only a fraction of that is used for the actual exams and assessment themselves, or the support they offer throughout the year. That's part of it. And of course, the other thing is exam boards are spending a huge amount of money at the moment figuring out how to do exams this summer. So all of that has been subsumed. Now, however long school closures, I wouldn't say that you're closed, you're open for many students, but school closures continue, you are being paid the same this year and next year and so on. You might not think that's enough, and SSAT would agree with you, but that money is protected. And there is an argument to say that, therefore, if there were substantial refunds from exam boards, and exam boards were first forced to then furlough more staff, actually, for society, that's not a good thing, and the government would end up having to pay more people out of taxpayers' money, whereas at the moment, you had already budgeted for those exams, and you're being paid the same despite school closures. So, realistically, I don't think we'll see massive refunds. It will be on a qualification by qualification basis. It will be on a exam board by exam board basis. But certainly, if you're financial planning, I wouldn't anticipate getting substantial exam fee refunds. So thinking about how this feeds into accountability, we know there are no school performance tables this year. So that means the only way that your parents and other stakeholders in the community will find out about your data is if you choose to tell them. There is literally no other way they're going to find that out. There'll be nothing published. So this summer, you have an opportunity as a senior team and as governors to decide what narrative you want to tell about your results. You could choose to publish your results as they would usually be in DfE performance tables. Of course, you can't work out progress rate because that's a relative measure and you won't have access to that data. But you could work out, you could release your percentage of grades achieved at a 5+, for example. But you don't have to. So I think that this opportunity is a really good time to think through, what do we want to say about our school and our results? Is it about destinations? Is it individual case studies and stories? So I think now's a good time to start thinking that through, particularly with your governors and trustees. And again, the DfE are very clear, the results from this year should not be used for performance management at all for any member of staff, including the head teacher or principal. So early entry data, as we know, will not be used in 2021 for year 12 sitting A levels or for year 10s sitting GCSEs and lower down as well. And we know that's controversial, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Many of you have been in contact to say that obviously Ofsted are suspended until the end of the academic year now, but many of you are saying they should be suspended beyond that because schools are going to be dealing with so many situations. And certainly Annie McGill, who was previously head of the chaired the Leading Edge Steering Group, who many of you know, has said Ofsted should be suspended next academic year. When Amanda Spielman went up against the Education Select Committee early this month, that's not at all what she said. What she actually said is without that school data, without performance measures in 2020, there is more of a need than ever for Ofsted to be in schools as early as possible. So given the Chief Inspector is saying that, I don't anticipate Ofsted being suspended once schools reopen properly. So if you are expecting an Ofsted visit, I think it is likely to come when schools reopen, based purely on what Amanda said in front of the Education Select Committee. So I'm going to move now to look at some of the common questions and answers we've had. Talking about early entry and the fact it doesn't count. I think one question I had pointed to two separate DfE documents. So each of these paragraphs comes from a different DfE document. The first is the more recent one, but only slightly more recent. And what it says is that centres can enter year 10 students this summer, but if they would prefer their students were not part of these exceptional arrangements, they can withdraw them. So it puts the emphasis on the school, on the centre. If you do not think it's in the interest of the students or the school to enter them this summer, you can withdraw them and get them to do it in the autumn or summer 2020. However, a second document, also from Ofqual, says that if students in year 10 have been entered, then they should be issued with results on the same basis in year 11 and above. Now, reading between these documents, I agree with the person who asked this, that my understanding of that is it is up to you as a school whether you enter these students in year 10 or year 9 or year 12 or not. If you do, then they will get the qualification, but they will not count towards your performance measures. If you don't, then of course it has profound curriculum implications for you. You'll need to rethink your curriculum next year. We do not know yet, but I think that second paragraph is problematic because arguably a parent or a student could say that this is the advice from Ofqual, and if that doesn't get updated soon, then they could say there is a requirement from Ofqual that those results should be issued to my child. And so again, I think there's some questions that need to be answered there by Ofqual, and certainly we are asking them. And the other issue is year 10 and year 12. It's made clear in that first document that for year 10s, it's up to the schools. For year 12, it's slightly less clear, and we had a specific question about curriculum models where talented mathematics students do A-level maths in year 12 and then go on to do further maths in year 13. And will those results count or not? The simple answer is you are being put in a very, very difficult position as a school, and you will have to decide whether you offer teacher assessed grades this summer and those students get it, or whether you take the hit on your performance measures if they're published in 2021, and explain that narrative. What I would say is, if you are going to decide to enter those students now in the summer and take the hit in 2021, start explaining that now. Talk to your governors now, talk to your parents now, say, look, we're doing this because it's right for the students, but we know as a school we're going to see a decline in results, probably as a result. And that's a purely, a mathematical game. But start that narrative now, if that's a decision you make. So the other questions that we had in, lots of you concerned that in the last couple of years you've had a dip in exam results, and we're expecting better results this year. How will this be accounted for in national standardization? Well, if you're expecting better results because your current year 11s are better based on their Key Stage 2 data, as in they have higher Key Stage 2 data, that will factor in. If they're similar, but you think as a school you have added more value to them, either through improved teaching and learning, through a different curriculum, unfortunately, that will not factor in. Unless something really changes with Ofqual, and I don't see it changing, that will not factor in. And there is no appeals process for that. So that will just be the situation. If your students don't feel they have got the grades they deserve because of that, they will be encouraged to sit the autumn exams or the summer exams. So many of you have asked about BTEC and vocational exams, which have 2 years of study, and where the external examination, external assessment is done in the first year of study. So should you be submitting grades for any external assessment that was part of a 2-year course? Yes, absolutely, you should be. Will these count in performance measures? We don't have a definitive answer yet, but my gut feeling is yes, they will, because I don't see how they couldn't otherwise. But certainly we don't have an answer on that. But yes, certainly if you have BTEC 2-year courses and there is an externally assessed element this summer, then you should be doing the normal teacher assessment and ranking activity. Right, if students do teacher assessment and sit exams, which counts for them? So for year 11 and year 13, they'll get their teacher assessed grade, which will then turn into their calculated grade they're given in August. If they choose to resit in either the autumn series or summer 2021, they will get the best of either. So even if they perform more poorly when they actually sit the exams, they still keep the teacher assessed grade, or the calculated grade they got this summer. So it's the best of. In terms of year 10s, sitting GCSEs, or year 12 sitting A-levels, it would be the same on an individual basis. They would keep the best grade they got. But of course, if you entered them as well for the exam, as well as giving them a teacher assessment grade, then their results would also count towards performance measures. But you might not think that's the right thing to do in the interest and well-being of those students. Which qualifications count in the early entry rules? All of them. Yeah, it's the same across all the general qualifications. We had a couple of questions about schools that have a small number of private candidates, which typically the schools are going to be returning students, year 14s if you have a sixth form. How do you include those students in your rank order, and does it disadvantage your current cohort? Arguably, it will do, because you're being asked to put that candidate in with the students that you teach. Again, a big caveat there. if your teachers are finding that hard to do, the advice from Ofqual is you have to have the same level of confidence in placing them in that rank order as the students you teach. If you don't have that same level of confidence, then you can't sign that legal disclaimer to say that your results have integrity. And so then you'll have to have a really, really difficult conversation with that private candidate and say either they need to find another centre, and there are centres that have a lot more experience of doing last minute assessments, or they need to wait until the autumn resit or the summer 2021. But as a school, if you're finding that hard, it probably suggests that you don't have that same level of confidence and you shouldn't be admitting them. Tier qualifications. So if you had tier qualifications, it will be down to each exam board to choose how you present that information. However, Ofqual have said, and therefore we can expect the exam boards will follow, this is likely to be done in one list for the subject, but you will need to specify what rank students were entered for. So what tier students were entered for. So it'll be one rank list for both higher and foundation, but you'll need to specify which tier they're in. So you could have higher fives ranked below foundation fives. And again, those subjects we need to work out how to do that. Many of you, in terms of the early entries, English language is a big one that's early entered for in year 10. So we know at the moment that those English language results won't count in the 2021 performance measures. There's been questions about, will you take a double hit and will you not get the double weighting of English at all, because it will be seen as essentially those students didn't sit both exams. Again, we don't have an answer on this yet. My gut feeling is it will probably, unfortunately, not count towards the double weighting. If they're saying that early entries don't count in performance tables, I don't see why they would use it as a condition for double weighting as well. We will argue against that. We'll argue it should be. We're arguing that it should be. We shouldn't publish them at all. But yeah, certainly, if you do have early English entries, it could lead to a double hit in 2021. And then the final question. So some of you have had sixth form colleges or sixth forms asking for predicted grades. And so saying, can we give these, or would that be exam malpractice because it could be perceived as a teacher assessed grade? So I think on this question, a few things to point out. One, have that sixth form college asked for predicted grades before? If they haven't, then I'd simply say no, and question why they're doing it. If it's something that you usually do and you usually provide predicted grades, I think we have to question what it is that sixth forms want to know about students. They don't necessarily want their predicted grade. They want to know, is this student suitable for further study in this subject? And so if you're being asked for predicted grades, to back yourselves and to make sure you're not falling foul of that regulation, you could just say for each subject that you either recommend or don't recommend further study in that subject, and keep it as a binary. If the sixth forms really push predicted grades, then of course what you need to make very, very clear is these are predicted grades and are not the teacher assessment grades that have been given. And I'd make that very, very, very clear. But I think if sixth forms are asking for that, I would hope that you'll be able to work with them and explain that under these current circumstances, it's not a helpful thing to be releasing. So at that point, I will pause and ask Mike to come in to see if we've had any specific comments or questions. Mike.
Hi everyone. Okay, first question was, given the announcement from the government yesterday and today, do we know when we'll have guidance from exam boards about the possibility of reducing some of the course content for exams next year?
No, we don't. Quite frankly, it's something we're talking to the exam boards a lot about. They are very conscious of it. I think what they're struggling with is, of course, because schools are free to teach the exam material in whatever order they want. It's not as simple as saying, well, we just won't include that last section of the published specification. So that's what they're keen to avoid, because that would undermine different curriculum models. They are looking at it and looking particularly at issues around maths, which we know is particularly large, and issues like geography, where lots of you will have done I've been planning your field trip for year 10s this term. So no is the answer, but certainly they're considering it and thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay. And again, following on from the announcement yesterday, will there be any guidance issued on which staff should be returning in June and July? Will it be staff who live with vulnerable people? And if a member of staff has been self-isolating, do they have the right not to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there won't be specific guidance about which staff should. That will be left to a local decision. So if you're still operating a rota, or maybe you will be operating a rota system, that's up to you to continue with. In terms of general guidance around COVID-19, absolutely those same rules apply. So if any member of staff develops symptoms of COVID or is tested positive for COVID, they should self-isolate for 7 days. And if any of your staff live with anyone who has developed symptoms of COVID or been tested positive for COVID, they should self-isolate for 14 days. And those rules remain in place.
Okay, next question. Will SSAT provide support and guidance for vocational qualifications and calculated grades?
Absolutely, yeah. Again, obviously the consultation we're still waiting for. We will do, I mean, just a caveat to say, it is more complex with vocational and technical, purely because each qualification looks quite different from one another. So we could provide quite specific guidance around BTECs, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to other vocational qualifications. Certainly, as we get more information, we'll keep the email forums updated. But just that caveat that it's not as clear as the general qualifications, where the same rules apply to all GCSEs, all AS and all A levels. It's a bit more complex. But yeah.
Okay. Do you have any advice for schools SLT who are moderating the department's CAGs?
Yep. I think the key thing there, if you haven't received, it's mentioned in the document that we sent out yesterday in the Sunday supplement around this, is just using your current quality assurance and moderation processes. You will all have systems in place to ensure that the predictions that you're being given as SLT and to governors are accurate, and really just rely on those. I think it's also important to remember that while it's helpful for SLT to set out the guiding principles about centre assessment grades and the ranking exercise, individual subjects will need to tailor that depending on both the nature of the discipline, but also, a subject taught by one teacher who knows all their students is going to be very, very different from a subject taught by 15 teachers. And so I think allowing enough flexibility and of course working very, very closely with your heads of department to do that. I mean, certainly if you've not done that already, getting your heads of department virtually and talking about how each of them is approaching it, they might learn off each other, and that might be a really helpful activity.
Okay, what is the advice on a handful of subjects who can justify an increase in attainment based on previous results? Should we submit and wait for Ofqual, or should we moderate in-house to match previous years?
No, so absolutely. If there is evidence that their key stage 2 prior attainment is higher, then absolutely submit that. That's within the formula. I mean, ultimately, also submit what you think is right. If genuinely, because your teaching and learning has improved, and your or your curriculum is improved, and you're expecting better results, but with similar kids, submit what you think is right. That's what you're being asked to do. But just be aware and manage the expectations of staff that based on this formula, there is a chance that those grades will be moved down. But don't try and second guess that at this point. All you're being asked to do as schools, I say all you're being asked, what you're being asked to do at schools, is to submit the grades you genuinely think students would have got this summer had their SSAT exams as normal. So do that. Don't try and second guess that part. Leave that to Ofqual. Manage expectations. Know there's a chance to be moved down as a result, and that's gutting, and in many ways very unfair. But in that first instance, do that. What do you genuinely think those students would have got?
Okay, and on that, are there any updates on whether the formula will be amended for UTCs?
There is mention that it will include special consideration for certain institutions, which I would imagine would include UTCs and special schools, but no details about that yet. Yeah.
Okay. Northumberland has a 3-tier system, so our year 4 students move to middle school. Will they be the same as year 6 in a 2-tier system?
I don't know. I very much doubt the government know that. I would imagine. I'd imagine not. What Northumberland County Council might do, working with the Multi Academy Trust in that area, is say actually as a region we want, or as a local authority, given that those important transitions, we want to also include year 4s in that. But that I imagine will be done at a county level.
Okay, a couple of comments on this one. So we had disastrous results in a subject last year for a number of reasons. This year we've changed the course completely and we'll get passes. How on earth do we statistically analyse this, ready for sending the CAGs to the exam board? Other schools must be in the same boat. And we had a reply immediately which says, yes, we have poor results in 2 to 3 departments. The course has changed, head teacher changed, head department changed, staffing changed. What kind of opportunity will we have to present this additional information?
Yeah, I mean, as I've just said in response to another question, unfortunately, under the current guidelines, and I said we're still waiting for the full response. Under the current guidelines, very little. But again, that doesn't mean that as a school you should be overly worried about that statistical analysis. You know, you are being asked to give what grade you think, or pass or fail you think those students would have achieved realistically in the summer. Unfortunately, because of those prior results, it might mean that those grades are moved down. If that's the case, then students will have the option to sit the exams in autumn or in summer 2020, which we know is not ideal. But at the moment, that's the short answer. There isn't an opportunity to present that information.
Okay, just a question. Can these slides be shared after the webinar, please?
Do you want to answer that, Mike? Can
these slides be shared with everybody once the webinar has finished?
Yeah, so I said, do you want to answer that?
So, yep, they can. So the webinar will be published hopefully either later on today or tomorrow as well, if there's anything that you need to catch up on as well afterwards. Is the autumn series the November series, or will this be in addition to?
So it's changed, as you might expect. So initially they were talking about an autumn series being as early as possible. Then there were rumblings about it being tied to the November series, so it will be tied to that. The latest guidance talks about doing it before Christmas. Now, I mean, basically, I think the point is we don't know. I mean, there may not be an autumn series at all. My gut feeling is that they will tie it in with the November series. Again, don't hold me to that. I feel like that will be a sensible way of doing it. And what that will mean is the November series for English and Maths will just be the one English and Maths exam, basically. But yeah, if it happens at all, we just don't know where we're going to be.
Okay, so next question. The deadline to withdraw students in year 10 for some exam boards is tomorrow. Should we withdraw still if we intend to not claim the grades for students?
So you can say that one again, Mike.
Yeah. So the deadline to withdraw students in year 10 for some exam boards is tomorrow. Should we withdraw still if we intend to not claim the grades for students while they wait for Ofqual?
Right. So, well, if you're intending not to enter those students, then yes, that makes sense. If you enter the students anyway through this process of teacher assessment and ranking and then a calculated grade, then you won't have a choice as to whether those results are counted or not. The students will get those GCSEs for themselves, but at the moment they won't be counted on for your results. So if you are, if you've decided as a school you're definitely not going to enter them, but you're going to enter them in either the you're going to enter them in summer 2021, then absolutely withdraw them if that's the decision you've made. But if you're thinking that you might still enter them, then obviously don't withdraw them. One thing I should point out is that I'm pretty certain if you withdraw them, year 10s or year 12s, from this summer, i.e. teacher assessment and ranking, they will not be eligible for the autumn series. They will only be eligible for the summer 2021 series. So if you choose to withdraw them, then it will be next summer, not the autumn series. The autumn series is only eligible for students who were entered into summer 2020 but are unhappy with their results. So that's something to bear in mind.
Okay. If you submit just a unit in year 10 with teacher assessments, but then complete the rest of the course in year 11, will the overall result that gets awarded in year 11 count in the school's performance measures in 2021?
Yeah, I think I talked about that in the question 4 of the Q&As. We don't know, frankly. My feeling is yes, but we don't know. But you do need to submit that teacher assessment unit. Yeah.
So, in Pearson's statement relating to exam units of vocational qualifications state that we do not need to give CAGs, but they will be calculated. Has this changed officially?
No, sorry. So again, this is where with vocational there are different sorts of, it varies from qualification to qualification. If there was a exam assessed entry unit this summer, then you should do a teacher assessment and ranking exercise in the same way. But again, each exam board and each qualification is slightly different, so do check this. However, any non-exam assessment, NEA, that hasn't been completed doesn't need to be completed. So I think hopefully that makes sense of the question, but yeah.
We are in an 11 to 16 school. If school students want to resit, where will they do this?
So they will resit through you as private candidates. Yeah.
Okay. And then what looks like the final question. If drama GCSE students want to resit their exam in the autumn series, will this only be the written component?
Don't know at this stage. So there's very little detail about the autumn series. But thank you. So I'll certainly bring that up with the exam boards in terms of practical assessments in those subjects. Yeah.
Okay. One final question has just popped in. And can year 12 maths realists be entered this summer? Resits, sorry. Can year 12 maths resits be entered this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. Year 12 maths resits can be entered this summer, but you need to enter them along with your year 11, so they need to be included in the rank of year 11. So let's say that you were anticipating to get a grade 4, then you'll need to rank them along with all the other year 11s that you assessed at being likely to get a grade 4.
Okay, and then just one final one has just popped in as well. Maths could be IGCSE or GCSE. Is it one rank for maths?
Yes, it's one rank per subject. I'll just double check that IGC thing. But certainly, yes. I mean, yeah, what the Ofqual guidance says is where a subject might use several syllabuses or qualifications, then they should do it as one rank. But I'll just double check that. But I'm almost certain it's one rank. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's everything.
But I think when in doubt with any of these questions, at the moment, while staff are doing this, while heads of departments are doing this, ask them to do one rank. If it's unknown at this stage, like the tiering system, because it's easier to then to take it out of one rank than it is to put it into two. So always ask for one rank if it's unknown. But I'm pretty certain with the GCSE and IGCSE, it's one, but I will double check.
And that seems to be everything.
Lovely. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. On Thursday, we're looking specifically around confidentiality and data protection. So if you'd like to invite other colleagues that have responsibility for that in your school, please do. Until then, do please continue to ask me questions that I will try and get around to people as quickly as possible. And if you want to know how SSAT can support you more widely and your colleagues, then please do email your relationship manager at rmteam@ssatuk.co.uk. But have a good rest of the afternoon and hopefully see you on Thursday. Thank you.